and welcome to the Mobile Strategies Operating System Migration webinar. Since 2002, ExtenData has helped over 1,500 companies with their mobility, supply chain, and other technology solutions. We have 5 areas of expertise. They are mobile computing, software development, professional services, wireless integration, and identification and tracking solutions. And that's the reason that we invited you and we welcome you to today's webinar. Before I pass it over to Bruce, who is our main speaker for the webinar today, I wanted to give you a little bit of housekeeping items here. There are 3 handouts in the GoToWebinar section for you to download. One is the handout for this webinar, so you can take that with you. Then there is the about ExtenData, and then about some of our services that we provide that are related to the context of today's webinar. So without any further ado, Bruce, why don't you take it away?
Great, thank you, George, and good morning, good afternoon, everybody. So I'm Bruce Willins. I'm actually an engineering fellow over here at Zebra. Part of my responsibility is to look at technologies generally our portfolio on a 2 to 3 year time horizon, but one of the major topics that came up, and this is going back about 4 or 5 years ago, is what's happening in the space of mobile operating systems. Most notably, everybody was a little bit questioning what's happening with Microsoft, what's happening with Windows Mobile CE. You know, what's this thing, back then, it was kind of funny to think back now, is, what's this thing called Android? And is that something I should consider, or should I be looking at HTML5 and JavaScript, and, once again, the right once run everywhere came up. So a lot of question marks, and I didn't realize that we'd still be talking about this 4 or 5 years later, but here we are, and it's still a topic of interest. So hopefully you have the first slide, and this is, it looks a little busy here, but if you go on that top bar, the fundamental change that occurred in our space is the fact that customers in the past were content with enterprise-only features, with the fundamental management and security features that we provided in our Windows Mobile CE devices. Along came smartphones, and that changed everything. That's the reality, and essentially what happened is customers shifted from saying enterprise-only features are adequate to now, I want the best of both worlds. I want enterprise and consumer features. Now, if you're familiar with the markets that we address, our addressable market, Zebra is the leader with about 1.4 million units a year, but the total addressable market is only about 5 million units a year. Now you take a look at all the features, this combination of consumer and enterprise features. The reality is you cannot financially go after a market that's 5 million units a year and expect that you can cover your development costs for all the superset of all enterprise and consumer features. So the reality in this new world order is that you have to have some element of consumer success to have a viable operating system. And we'll go in through some of the numbers, but the reality is that's the fundamental issue. Windows Mobile CE, great operating system for enterprise, have no consumer success. They're just not viable. So since 2011, everything was great. We were Windows Mobile CE. We continue to ship those devices. However, as the dodo bird illusion there is, they're starting to become extinct. And so this whole presentation and the Q&A period will be about where do I go from here? And by the way, this sounds really bad, but with the change actually brings opportunity. So as I just mentioned a minute ago, is the reality is you have to have consumer success in this day and age to have an operating system that's going to be viable for the long term. And I get customers, I deal with a lot of tier 1 customers, a lot of C-level folks, CIOs, CTOs, IT directors, and they'll always ask me, what's the risk going forward? So what this is the landscape of the overall mobile OS smartphone market. So this is consumer, and right, what I just explained was the fact that you can't separate that anymore. You have to have consumer success. The most noticeable chart is the bar chart all the way on the right. So that's Q1 16. We're waiting for update numbers. It tends to lag quite a bit. but Android had about 82.8% of the overall worldwide market. And by the way, that market this year will be about 1.3, 1.4 billion units. It's a very, very large market. Apple typically ranges between 15 and 20%. So I'm looking at the bar chart all the way on the right. You see 14.8%. The one that's a little bit disconcerting and that you should take note of is the Microsoft number. So Microsoft with its, I'll use different names, but Win 10 Mobile. The right name for our space is Win 10 IoT Mobile Enterprise, but that's a mouthful. Microsoft for Win 10 Mobile and Windows Phone in general had 0.7% market share, so 0.7. So if you jump to the lower left-hand side here, you see some interesting anecdotal little clip of a quote from Satya Nadella. Satya Nadella, of course, is the CEO of Microsoft. You could sit there and see that back in January of this year, Satya was quoted that 1.7% was not sustainable. Well, he hasn't updated that quote to say, okay, what about 0.7? Now, by the way, we also have information that it looks like now it will, the next update will show it that it's below 0.5%. So when we look at the future operating system direction, you know, the question is for Microsoft on the mobile OS side, do we see risk in Windows 10 Mobile? And based on its consumer presence, there is some risk there. Okay, so it sounds really bad, but actually, you know, it may not be as bad as you want to think. So what we look at is we have a lot of customers out there that are sitting there on Windows Mobile CE. We call them, you know, deferrers. There's deferrers and defectors. Defectors have moved off. Deferrers can tend to stay in there. And the reality is, if you look, there's about 15 million mobile computers that are out in the field today on Windows Mobile CE, and I'm going to show you some maintenance and support numbers, but Microsoft has moved both of those operating systems off mainstream support. So there is no more mainstream support for Windows Mobile CE operating systems. So it begs the question, those 15 million devices that are out there at some point will need to migrate to something new. And that represents about a $12 billion opportunity of a transformation. So it's huge, and I like to, everybody asks me what's the leaky faucet there, and I use the example, the anecdotal story is downstairs in my house had a leaky faucet, and I figured it's a 25-cent washer, and it was until I looked at the faucet, and I said the faucet's kind of old, and maybe it's time. And I looked at the basin's kind of rusted. I looked at the cabinet, and that was kind of mushy and saturated from water down. And I said, finally, that's it. So $15,000, $20,000 later, it's a rip and replace. I almost view that same circumstance as what's happening in the market today. A lot of customers are now sitting there saying, okay, what do I do after Windows Mobile CE? We see that Microsoft may or may not be a viable solution, but it's certainly going to be a risky solution in all cases. And this is very, very important. Whether the customer stays with Microsoft Win 10 or whether they go to Android or iOS or HTML5 or Tizen or anything else, they are going to be forced to rewrite native applications. So they are going to be forced to rewrite and or re-architect. It turns out in the newer Microsoft Windows 10, the architecture is significantly different than Windows Mobile CE, so there's actually a lot of re-architecting that has to be done. We've had a lot of customers migrate from Win Mobile CE recently to Android, and they say it's easier than trying to stay back on a Windows 10 project. So that's the opportunity. The opportunity is now customers are coming back, just like my bathroom where I said rip and replace. They're going back and they're saying, you know what, maybe we should re-architect our application. Maybe we should think of a new development framework that's cross-platform. Maybe we should sit there and rethink the UI. Maybe we should rethink about what devices we're going to give to employees. And our resistive touchscreens are not quite the latest and greatest. And you give a Windows Mobile with a resistive touchscreen device to a young person today, and the first thing they're trying to figure out how to gesture, and they can't do that. So that's kind of the opportunity. Make no mistake, our strategy then is really simple. Look, we continue to support our Windows Mobile CE customers. We continue to ship many of those Windows Mobile CE devices. There are some issues that are driving people to migrate more quickly. Certainly security support is a major issue for a lot of customers. We introduced Android, and that little icon next to Android is what we call our mobile extensions, essentially an add-on on top of standardized Android. So we are not a proprietary version of Android, standard Android, that allows additional management and security features. We did that in 2011, and by the way, we didn't want to do it. Make no mistake, the last thing our senior execs wanted to hear from Bruce was that, hey, we're going to introduce another operating system into the portfolio. And finally, on the bottom, you'll see there cross-platform. We continue to believe that a good path for customers and ISVs and solution providers is to go rewrite their applications in some form of cross-platform. Most noticeably, what we see is in our customer base is they want to retain their C#.NET skills, and they use something like Xamarin, which is now owned by Microsoft and part of Visual Studio. And we provide extensions on top of that, what we call our Xamarin EMDK, that extend the compatibility. So essentially, Xamarin allows customers, ISVs, developers to take their C#.NET skills and use those skills with Visual Studio, but write an application that will run on Android or iOS or legacy Microsoft. So very powerful environment. Okay, this is a quick snapshot of our portfolio. This isn't a device conversation, but the thing to take away from here is you can see all the different icons representing the operating system, and you can see that there's a healthy mix of still Microsoft and Android products. A question I often get is, hey Bruce, are there products that do both? And the answer is some that do both. There are some that, in the case of our ET55 and 50 tablets, those can support Microsoft and Android. The MC67 supports Microsoft Android, and MC3200 and 9200s are all capable of running legacy Microsoft and Android. Another question I get is kind of, okay, well, what's the mix look like? I can see all the icons in here, and I put some other things. From an operating system perspective, the pie chart on the right is the one that you're probably most interested. 10 of those devices are shipping with Android, CE 10, and Windows Mobile 6. And by the way, just as a little factoid, is the fact that we did just recently, last quarter, ship our 1 millionth Android device. So we're seeing Android a significant uptick. Today, there's still a lot of Microsoft out there. Windows Mobile, CE, for example, represented 39% of our shipments last quarter. Android represented 41%, so Android just crossed the CE mark. Windows Mobile, about 20%. Okay, so what about, I mentioned before, this whole mainstream and extended support, and what does all that mean? So this is a summary of Microsoft, what they post on their site. I just put it into a tabular format, but as you can see, Windows Mobile and CE on the left-hand side here, if you look in the column that's listed as mainstream support, and you can see it's all red. So that means, and what mainstream support means in the Microsoft context, essentially that means that there are updates to the operating system, there's phone support for the operating system, and there's new features. Now, all of those are gone because those operating systems are no longer on mainstream support. When it's in extended support, and you can see that both Windows Embedded Handheld 6.5, which is basically a rebranded Windows Mobile 6.5, that goes out to January 14, 2020, but make no mistake, that means it gets security patches. It does not get security protocol updates. And that's an important distinction that has confused many of our customers and our partners, is they sit there and they say, well, it's supported out to 2020. Only patches. So new security protocols that have come up like TLS 1.2 or SHA-2 for the security folks out there, the reality is those are not getting introduced into this operating system. Those are new security protocols. Only thing that Microsoft will give you is patches for what exists there today. Okay, so that's true for Windows Mobile and CE. Today, what's posted on their website, which is for Windows 10 Mobile Enterprise, the current mainstream support date that's been made public, we've been asking Microsoft to do some extended support, they haven't replied yet, is January 9, 2018. So, you know, that's also a significant issue right now. Customers are concerned that you know, tough to put out an operating system, and as you can see, my little tag that's been updated now to October 2018, but still that's not enough of a support window to make enterprise customers very comfortable. So that's still an issue in the Microsoft path. We'll see, hopefully Microsoft will do some kind of an update and give us an extension on that, but right now that's, to be perfectly honest, it's kind of a non-starter. And by the way, I do want to make sure everybody understands we're just releasing a Windows 10 IoT mobile enterprise device. We're doing so because, you know, there are a few, not too many, customers that, you know, are still interested in Microsoft, but, you know, it does come with significant risk. Okay, so this is a little timeline that will help everybody understand how we got where we are. If you look at CE, starts back at CE 5, well, that kind of ended at WEC 7.0. That was in March 2011. That was last. There is a WEC 2013. We're not supporting it. Pretty much all our competitors are not as well. And of course, there you see those red arrows. That implies that that the Windows Mobile operating system, of course, is based on the CE kernel. It's actually based on CE 5 kernel. Well, that went up to Windows Mobile 6.5, which ended in September 2009. That is the time frame, by the way, that Microsoft said, hey, we got to compete with Android and iOS. So that was in that 2009, 2010 time frame, and they released something called Windows Phone 7. Well, Windows Phone 7 was not an enterprise operating system. It was not a successor for Windows Mobile. It was an operating system that was completely targeted on the consumer side. So you could see that was the point at which Microsoft said, you know what, I really got to get after those consumer side. Well, that did not succeed, and after 2 years, Microsoft end-of-lifed it. And by the way, I know the market share numbers behind that operating system, and they're better than the current Microsoft market share numbers. So they did release Windows Phone 8, and in that case, they kind of went back a little bit and said, okay, we're going to do a Windows Embedded 8 handheld, which will be an enterprise version of Phone 8. And by the way, the two operating systems, the Windows Embedded 8 handheld, it's 98, 99% the same code as the consumer version. Well, that one lasted not so long as well, did not get much adoption, and then, of course, came out just when the first products came out on Windows Embedded 8.1, which happened in 2014, right when we did not release a product on that operating system, but some of our competitors did. Right when those products first hit the market, Microsoft announced Windows 10. Of course, that tend to curtail any adoption of the Windows Embedded 8.1 products. And today, so Microsoft, you see the little bouncing red arrows in the lower right-hand corner. The reality is that was supposed to be a coordinated release with all the different versions of Windows 10. It took about a year later before we finally got a version. We got a version, but there now is speculation and rumors that Microsoft may actually do another shift and move to an x86, but we'll see what happens there. So that's kind of the timeline of how we got where we are. I do want to emphasize the fact that, you know, you can still buy Windows Mobile CE products from us. You can see the 5 products that I put all the way over in the right there. Those 5 products actually represented 70% of our Windows Mobile CE shipments in Q2 2016, and those will still be available in 2018, some of them even beyond that. Windows 10, 2 products, the tablet, and as I mentioned before, what we're calling the TC7X, and that's going to be a Windows 10 IoT Mobile Enterprise. So a little bit just to kind of tell you where we are internally. We did ship over 1 million units of Android. For 2015, we had year-over-year growth in Android of about 272%, triple-digit growth. We're seeing significant growth this year as well. If we go to the next slide, and hopefully it's caught up on your screens, you can see a bunch of logos from major corporations, tier 1s, pretty much across the board. And the surprising thing here is when we originally introduced Android, we thought retail was probably going to be the early adopter and the major adopter. What we're seeing at this point is it has gone across every vertical, whether it's retail and hospitality, transportation, logistics, manufacturing, healthcare. we've now shipped Android devices into pretty much every vertical that we service. A quick note on, so what do I do? If I have an application, if it's written in C#, where do I go from here? There are really three general paths, and we don't have time to go through details, but some folks are taking their C# applications and simply rewriting them in Java, the native language of Android. The best way I can describe it is, for the folks that are programmers on here, is a class is a class is a class. It's not that radical to be able to take your C# application and rewrite it in Java. That's certainly one option. Another option is to move up and try to go into some web constructs, into a higher level, into an HTML5 JavaScript environment. We've got some customers who are doing that. The performance certainly is not going to match some of the native applications. The UI is going to be a little bit different, look more like a web-based application as opposed to a native UI in this case of Android. But you certainly do get cross-platform that way. And the third one, which is what I mentioned before, is we got a lot of customers that are retaining their C# and saying, hey, I wrote all this code. I want to reuse some of the code, and more importantly, I want to maintain my skill set and what I've learned about C#. Well, you certainly can do that using .NET, using Xamarin, and by the way, Xamarin is available as a plug-in to Visual Studio, so you can even have your development environment, the same development environment that you used to originally develop the application. Not 100% of your code is going to migrate over. The code will vary depending on how much is business logic versus the UI, but nonetheless, as the business logic, a large part of that code will migrate over. As I mentioned before, because you've probably written applications that use things like Magstripe API, or might be using the barcode APIs, now you can get those as well. Zebra does provide a plugin for the Xamarin and an EMDK, so that you'll be able to actually take your applications and still use those APIs that you had on legacy Windows Mobile and CE devices. I want to talk briefly, and I know we're going to run out of time, and I want to make sure we have plenty of time for Q&A. So I'm going to go right through the animation here. Android for Work comes up a lot. So everybody understands, in the Android world, there's Android Open Source Project, and then there's Android with Google Mobile Services on top of it. So Android for Work is actually a term that Google uses. It's basically a marketing term. Android for Work, as the quote up on the subtitle says, a program for supporting enterprise use of Android. By program, not software. It's basically everything that Google does to support security, to support enterprise. So it's an amalgamation of a lot of different things, and that's the one thing I want you to take away from this chart, is when somebody says, are you doing Android for Work, the two areas that are most important here is Google Mobile Services and AOSP. So Android for Work derives much of its features from Android Open Source Project. And that's the major source of confusion. When I describe features that are part of what's considered, well, when I describe features that are part of AOSP, customers will often say, well, I thought that's part of Android for Work. The answer is they're both right. It is part of AOSP, and if you bought an AOSP device, you will get that feature. Google brands it under Android for Work. So just make sure. And about certainly 95% maybe of the features that are branded under Android for Work are actually in an AOSP. So you can still buy an AOSP and get many of the same features. There is one major feature today. Well, there's more, but the one major feature that comes out in the Android for Work program that requires GMS, Google Mobile Services, is what's called Google Play for Work. And essentially that is a private app store. Okay? So that allows you to create an app store that only your employees can see, that can be provisioned to your employees both on a push and a pull. So it's kind of a very, very nice private app store. It has a lot of the attributes and features that you have in the general Play Store, but this is private to an enterprise customer. So we don't have a lot of time to go through all of this, but just recognize the takeaway here, Android for Work is really kind of a marketing umbrella, and many of the features that we talk about under Android for Work, you can actually get in AOSP. Okay, briefly want to talk about security, and then let's open it up for questions. First of all, the security, key to security in this new world order is lifecycle. What we're seeing from customers, and this is a survey that was done not too long ago, was the fact that customers are looking to keep their devices in play for a longer and longer period of time. And by the way, it's not different from the consumer side. And the consumer side right now in the U.S., the average refresh for a smartphone is 29 months, which has gone up significantly. A lot of folks are not finding the new features as compelling as they did in the past, where in the past everybody said, oh, I got to buy the next one every year. So in the enterprise, what we're seeing is 51% of the respondents in this case were saying we want 5 years or more. And by the way, I think it's even further. This is about a year, year and a half old. I'd say it's even further out to the right now, where we're seeing folks sitting there saying 6, 7 years, and then even beyond that. So what I want to bring out here is, if you're familiar with our devices, we generally have 3 classifications of devices. And we talk about 3.3 or 4.4 or 5.5. The first number represents the number of years the device is available for sale. The second number representing the number of years the hardware is serviced by Zebra. In this new world order, where security is so important, customers look at the life cycle of a device and say, well, it's not just relegated to when can I buy hardware and when can I service hardware. You need to tell me also, can I get security support for it? So that's one of the things that Zebra is doing that is a tremendous value proposition, puts us in a class way beyond consumer devices, and quite frankly, even beyond any of our competitors. So there's basically 3 things that we're looking to do here. We're providing extended security life that goes beyond the end of sale of the product. We're going to support what we call the security while you transition, meaning when we release a new operating system for a device, we understand that our customers can't instantaneously move to a new operating system. So what we have is what's called an OS transition period, whereby we'll continue to provide security patches for the previous version of operating system for 12 months while the customer now can get to the new operating system. And finally, we're moving to a more aggressive updates. Now, this is a pain, but it is part of the new world order we live in, is we'll be moving in Q1 of 2017 to 30-day security updates. And this gets back to the whole proposition that in this new world, in order to have a successful operating system, you have to have consumer success. If you have consumer success, you will be the target for attack. If you are the target for attack, the best way to mitigate that attack is to make sure you get frequent security updates. So this is something that is just a natural thing that has to happen. It's very, very challenging. You know, we have a lot of folks. We have a dedicated team just doing security patches for our operating systems. So something that's a tremendous value proposition. And finally, just a little bit more about security. This is just a very, very high level. We often do security webinars that do a deep dive on some of these topics. The circle on the right, the security lifecycle management, that's what we just went through, because that right now is front and center of every customer I talk to. But just recognize some of the things that we drive through what we call our mobile extensions and our mobility DNA are things, policies in security such as defense in depth, which is basically means multi-level security. Means that if an attacker gets past one level of security, is there another barrier for them to get that would stop them from getting in, and another one and another one. Multi-level security is essentially defense in depth. Principle of least privilege. So it sounds fancy. The reality is there an on-off switch for every feature and function of the device? The more that customers can shut off on the device that they're not using, the more secure the platform will be. And once again, that's some of the features that are in our mobile extensions. The ability to either from a staging proposition where you're just scanning a barcode to have those things shut down, or from an EMM or MDM. So that's all I've got, Georgia. Once again, I thank you very much for the opportunity, and I thank the ExtenData for allowing me to talk.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate your subject matter expertise and the time that you spent today. So thank you very much, everybody. Have a good day and enjoy the rest of your week.